Narcissist, narcissist, narcissist. The amount of times I've heard that word, holy smokes. I think most of us say it without really knowing what it means.
Yeah, I'm an advocate for professional support, not in any way to diminish the work of our pastors and all of that, but I think it's important to give the professional what is the professionals and to give to faith what is faith.
Okay. That's a loud message for our community, but please go on.
Yeah, because I think, many times, we find that when people have marital problems, they go to their pastors. When people have, health issues, not so much physical health, but emotional health issues. And I think if we give the same weight to mental health as we do to physical health, we will know that it needs to be handled by a professional.
100%.
An explanation. No is a complete sentence. When I say no, I don't need to explain to you why. And our young people need to understand that if there's something you're experiencing that you're not comfortable with, you're not comfortable with it. You don't need to be coerced into it.
The Dim Din Podcast, a safe space to talk about misconceptions, perceptions, assumptions, and frustrations. Join us for conversations and stories that explore how embracing our differences leads to a balanced, strong, and harmonious world.
Narcissistic abuse, narcissistic tendencies. Narcissist, narcissist, narcissist. The amount of times I've heard that word, holy smokes. I think most of us say it without really knowing what it means. But today we want to have a conversation around some of the details that you need to understand narcissistic abuse. I am your host, Becca, and this is the Dim Dim Podcast. Now, to have this conversation with me is a dedicated counseling therapist, clinical supervisor, and certified grief educator with nearly a decade of clinical experience. She specializes in grief and loss, childhood and adult trauma, immigrant challenges, domestic violence, complex relationship dynamics, and supporting survivors of abuse. Her work with individuals, couples, and families experiencing various forms of loss, including illness, bereavement, relationship breakdowns, partner or family abuse, terminal diagnosis and caregiver support, PTSD, discrimination, and other traumas. Her client-centered approach prioritizes understanding, validation, and healing. She's no other person than the beautiful Kate Koei. As I call her, Auntie Kate. Welcome. Welcome to the Dim Dim Podcast.
Thank you.
It's so lovely to have you. Did I miss anything that you want to add to that resume?
No, I think you honestly did a perfect job. I couldn't add anything else to it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to make time to have this conversation because I know you're a busy woman.
Well, this is an important conversation, so I am glad that we get to make time for it.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue actually to my first question. Why is this an important conversation to have at this time? And are there any stats, like statistics, to support the importance of this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the reasons is just what you started off by telling us. It is a word that is being thrown around everywhere. Every difficult person that you interact with, every difficult situation has a narcissist in it. So it is worth understanding what it is that we are talking about, just to avoid mislabeling and maybe calling people what they're not, and also finding appropriate resources for people that are actually experiencing it or not experiencing it, just based on the understanding. And I think within our community, I mean, what makes it is important is the increase in immigration. People moving. We have a lot of our community that is no longer living at home and in different parts of the world. And with that comes an increase of domestic violence, family violence. And when I talk about domestic violence, it's not just intimate partner violence, but people sharing a home, children with caregivers, family members, and in our culture, friends whom we're supporting. We all probably have gone through seasons where we have a friend that we grew up with, that is a cousin, as a sister, and is living in our homes. And then, honestly, ignorance is not bliss. There's opportunity for us to increase our mental health awareness and to reduce the stigma and get support. So we need to understand some of these subjects.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Ignorance is not bliss. I love that. I love that. And are there any stats to maybe like the amount of people out there that are struggling with this, or is this, like you said, just like an everyday thing that people talk about without really knowing more information?
Honestly, I haven't come across any specific stats for narcissistic abuse, and just because of the way it shows up anyway. I mean, people who have NPD are not people who are going to walk into a clinic and say, this is it, right? And also, it's not, and it's also quite difficult to get a person that may actually be having NPD to come in for support. Most times, it's the people that are experiencing it that will talk about it, and not necessarily have the people causing it come with them. And in most cases, at least as I've had and as I've encountered, narcissistic personality disorder, people at least that may be suffering from it or showing traits, will come in for treatment because of other things. So the isolation and all of that may cause depression, may cause anxiety. So it's other things than the specific traits.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you had mentioned earlier that immigration is one of the reasons why we need to have conversations like this. That brings me to the question of, is this a concern in the African diaspora communities? If yes, how does it show within these communities?
So it is, I wouldn't say specifically that narcissistic abuse is a concern in of itself, other than the overall experience of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a concern in our community, and there's different types of domestic violence: financial, physical, sexual, mental, emotional, and now there's online and digital. And then narcissistic personality is a concern to the extent that how the people that experience it are impacted, and the differences in the way it shows up in different cultures. In some cultures, it is more apparent, especially in individualistic cultures where self-praise, personal accomplishments is a thing. And then in communities where it's collective, it is not likely to show that much, just because of the way the cultural norms are. And so it is a concern to the extent that if somebody was experiencing it, depending on the culture they come from, you will not know. So I want to say that domestic violence overall is a concern, not just the experience of narcissistic abuse.
Oh, wow. Beautiful, beautiful. I hear you say something about self-praise, like just to flush that out a little bit. Will that self-praise be considered sort of like be attributed to narcissistic tendencies in some cultures, but not others?
Not necessarily. Well, it can be, and I can imagine if you think about our culture, and I know even in my own experience coming here, when you go for interviews, at least one of the things that I noticed is that, let's say, people of our mainstream culture are able to come and say, oh, I did this, I did this, I did that, and I did that. And for me, it was something I found impressive to be able to say, because in our culture, it comes across as bragging. You know, when you say, I'm good at this, I'm good, you'll hear people say, that person has no humility. You know, they just talk about themselves. You know, that's our culture. And so if you were that expressive in our culture, you can very easily be termed narcissistic. You know, that person is such a narcissist. I mean, they just talk about themselves and all of that. And yet that's really not what it is. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's where then it's like the definition or the what to look out for can change with different cultures. Okay, beautiful. And I've heard you mention domestic violence alongside talking about narcissistic abuse. Is there a difference? Like, are they one and the same thing, or is there a difference between the two? How do we separate?
Domestic abuse, I mean, just talking about, is a conscious behavior where somebody causes harm to another person in the ways that we have discussed. So basically, a narcissistic personality can abuse a person, right?
Right.
So that is, but yet, let me sort of see how to describe it. People experience abuse, and it's not necessarily by a narcissist.
Okay.
Yeah. People experience abuse by people who make choices to harm other people in the ways that we have described. And a narcissistic personality can also be abusive.
Okay.
Yeah. So I want to say domestic abuse, family abuse is an umbrella, and under it are different things. And a narcissistic personality can be abusive, and a person that is not a narcissist can also be abusive.
Okay. I love that. Yeah. So literally the way we separate them is someone with a narcissistic personality can also be an abuser, but someone that's an abuser does not necessarily become
is not necessarily a narcissist.
Okay. Beautiful. Now, talking about the narcissist then, quote and unquote, what are some of the factors that would influence that kind of a personality disorder?
So narcissist, there I don't know if I would say there are causes to narcissistic behavior, to narcissistic personality, but there are some risk factors. Yeah. Okay. There are environmental factors, and there have been some twin studies that talk about, some genetic factors, but that I don't think that is clear as yet, so I wouldn't say that. But some of the risk factors include, environmental factors, adverse childhood experiences, parenting styles. It has been said sometimes overindulging a child or neglect can also increase some of those risk factors. And then there's the risk of gender, and I think that's more a cultural aspect, that men are more likely to have narcissistic personality disorders. So those at least are the main things that would indicate some level of risk.
Wow. So like when you say overindulging a child, would that be like what we would say, like you're spoiling your child?
That would probably be some level of spoiling a child, what we would call spoiling. Just not teaching our kids some responsibilities, some accountability, just having what sometimes people would call the golden child syndrome. What they never do anything wrong. There's a reason why they have done what they have done, and just not allowing them to have the ability to connect with others, empathize, and be sort of self-aware and aware of the needs of other people.
Beautiful. As you're speaking to that, then Can we expand a little bit on some of the other things we can look out for in someone that may pass for an, a narcissistic personality, like may pass for that description?
Okay, so we will talk about some of the things that you see in an narcissistic personality,
Yes.
and then we can also talk about the experience of narcissistic abuse. Yeah.
Okay.
So people who will have narcissistic personality disorders have a sense of grandiosity and self-importance. They always in a space they think they're better than others, and they have this superiority that is really often very unrealistic. Yeah. And then, fantasies about power and success. This feeling of having to be on top of others and really doing whatever it takes to get there and diminishing other people in the course of it. So it's not a healthy power. It's not, we can't share it. Other people have to be below me, you know? A sense of entitlement,
A big
what I
one, it
want, I
sounds
must
like.
have. Yeah. And then limited insight, just the inability to sort of understand consequences, cause and effect, or believing that they're above them. You know, other when you do something, you can get punished. I don't deserve that. I'm above that. And then a constant need for admiration and praise. You know,
Aha.
they need you to see them. They need you to acknowledge what they have done, whether meaningful or not, all of that. But just that need for admiration and praise, and using manipulation to take advantage of others.
Ooh.
So things are never really black and white with them. There's something in the background that you don't really know. Yeah. And then limited or poor empathy. Just the inability to connect or understand the feelings of other people or the experiences of other people. They just don't get it. And then competitiveness, distrust, jealousy, and then some scorn and arrogance towards other people.
Ooh.
Yeah. And in mentioning all of the symptoms, though, I mean, in all of the traits, I want us to also be conscious of the fact that we all can have traits. A narcissistic personality is on a spectrum. If you think about all of the things I've mentioned, I think we can all identify that at some point in our lives, we all have pulled one of those.
Cheers to that.
Yeah? We all have pulled one of those somewhere. So the personality traits is that what makes for narcissistic personality disorder is that you have a lot of these traits, and there is a lack of accountability, and then it shows in relationships, so the stability of relationships. And then you look at the context and the durability. So it has to be something that goes on for a long period of time. So you're able to say, this is the way this person always is, in almost every circumstance, and they're unable to be accountable for their behavior, and it shows up in their relationships.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So me being a certain way for a week because of something does not make me have narcissistic personality disorder. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So that's something that's very important. Then I think even for people that are throwing the term out around as often as we've heard, knowing this detail should help them sort of like be a bit more intentional about who to call that, right?
Yeah.
Is there
So
any,
going to an event for a day and experiencing this self-absorbed person, you can't leave there and say that's a narcissist.
aha. Okay. Okay. Disagreeing with your partner about something that they want and then putting their foot down does not make them a narcissist either.
Yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't make them an narcissist. So we have to be really careful in throwing those things around. I'm not a fan of labeling people, even in disagreements. Like when we're talking about something that we're not in agreement with, it's worth mentioning what it is that you're experiencing rather than throwing out something. So if you came and you are having a low day, I can't just say, hey, Becca, you're depressed. You'd be like, where is that coming from?
Like, what did I do?
Yeah. I just shared something. So something can't just happen and say, oh, you're a narcissist.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. I really like that. And I think even when it comes to being diagnosed with it, if that's even a thing, there are certain traits that you probably would have to meet, not
Yeah.
just meeting one, right? There's probably like 5 or more that you may have to meet to get that diagnosis, if that's a thing, right?
Yeah. And over a period of time. And many
Beautiful.
times, and because people, like we have said, with the personality disorder will not self disclose, most times it is from the experience of the other person. Yeah. So we will most times be able to identify narcissistic abuse because of the experience of those experiencing it. Yeah. And so as we talk about the confusion of narcissistic personality disorder and abuse, as it would be, I think it's very important not to diminish the experience of those that experience narcissistic abuse because it is really a traumatic experience. And that's why it's important to know the difference.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. I'm glad that you touched on that a little bit, and I'd like to get back on that. But before that, for those who may meet the amount of traits to be diagnosed with this, if it's a thing, is there any available treatment for narcissistic personality disorder?
I don't know if I would say there's a treatment.
Okay.
I would say there's support.
Okay.
Yeah. There is support. And people who are experiencing, like I said, narcissistic personality disorders can have other things as well, can have depression, can have anxiety. There's medications for those. Yeah. But there isn't treatment, at least pharmacological treatment for narcissistic personality disorder, but there's support around traits. Now, many people have, different researchers talk about support for narcissistic personality disorder. There are those who say that it cannot be treated. I've been following the work of Terry Real, and he says that he can treat people with personality, support people with personality disorder, with NPD. And it is sort of working with them from the way they perceive issues. So it's like, you want a good relationship, this is what you need to be. So coming from the place where they see the gain for themselves in it, and so their behavior is to help them get what it is they want.
So they're not changing for anybody else but themselves, or making changes for themselves.
Yeah. So coming from that perspective. So I don't know if I would say that's treatment or that's support. Yeah. And I also don't know how that impacts the person that lives with them, where a person is changing their behavior because of what they gain more than having that natural empathy, for example, or that natural compassion. So I would say there's support.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I can imagine with an approach like that, there would be like an ongoing need for support for the individual, like the individual with the narcissistic personality disorder, because if they are targeting one what's the word? It's not a consequence. Like if they're targeting one outcome or something that they're making changes to get from this person, and they may always want to get something from this person. So are they always going to like target that specific thing all the time? And if that's the case, does that mean like ongoing support, non-stop support from
Mm-hmm.
this person?
Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm curious about how the development of that support looks like,
Right,
because there has to be a level of commitment from this individual,
right,
from the person that has the disorder.
right,
There is a level, and yet from the traits, it is difficult to say that you can get that level of commitment. You know,
right.
if this is a manipulative personality, if this is a person who feels entitled, then why would they sit in sessions, for example, and do this work on an ongoing if they think that you should be the one to change?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's aspects there that I think there's a little more research that that continues to happen as to whether it's sustainable. And
Right.
that's why for me in my work, I have an interest more in the people, in the survivors of narcissistic abuse, more than the personality disorder.
Beautiful, beautiful. And as we're going to that, like as she was saying, making reference to the piece of manipulation as well, the thing that stood out for me was at what point and how do you even separate the treatment, like the treatment approach from manipulation itself? Like how do you separate the two? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then going to the survivors, like you said, that's you choose to focus more on that. What supports are available to them? Like how do we support them?
Well, there's counseling is definitely, I think, a big part of it.
Okay.
And of course, with narcissistic abuse, there's just because of the way it happens, because there's the need for that power and control. You find that people who experience narcissistic abuse will also find themselves lacking in resources.
Mm,
Whether it's this person making sure that you don't have adequate work, or you don't have money, or something. I mean, it can get really serious sometimes. And so when you think about those aspects, that's how they can be supported.
mm,
And an important piece in our culture to remember is that people who are experiencing abuse, not just narcissistic abuse, are not always likely to leave the relationship.
right.
And so support can be encouraging them towards maintaining connections so that they're not isolated. Being in counseling with a professional. People of our cultural backgrounds, faith is an important aspect, whether it's our traditional beliefs or belief in God, just tapping into all of those things.
Mm,
Yeah. I'm an advocate for professional support, not in any way to diminish the work of our pastors and all of that, but I think it's important to give the professional what is the professionals, and to give to faith what is faith.
ah, ah. Okay. Okay. That's a loud message for our community, but please go on.
Yeah, because I think, many times, we find that when people have marital problems, they go to their pastors. When people have, health issues, not so much physical health,
Mm,
but emotional health issues. And I think if we give the same weight to mental health as we do to physical health, we will know that it needs to be handled by a professional.
100%.
Yeah. And so that's a piece. And it's not in any way to diminish the work of the church, because they have their place, and both can exist.
Right. Right. Like a
Both can
holistic
exist.
approach.
You can see your counselor and you can see your pastor.
Right. Right. There can be a collaboration there instead of the pastor taking on the role of the counselor.
But because it is harmful when you tackle an issue that you don't know.
Beautiful. And the counselors, I don't know, but But as far as I know, the counselors don't take on the roles of the pastors. We try to stay away from that. As we're rounding up here, Auntie Kate, what message can you send to a 15-year-old about what they can look out for as they're growing into a beautiful woman, man, and may have encounters with people of this personality? Like, what do they need to know about self, and what do they need to know to sort of like choose healthy and prevent taking on paths like this in their best interest?
Trusting yourself and starting really early in building relationships that respect your boundaries.
Ooh.
We I think many times, and again we move back to the cultural aspect, where saying yes or no is not saying no needs an explanation. No is a complete sentence. When I say no, I don't need to explain to you why. And our young people need to understand that if there's something you're experiencing that you're not comfortable with, you're not comfortable with it. You don't need to be coerced into it. And then encouraging people to read, inform themselves. We have access to resources online. A lot of these things that some of us experience and encounter are things we never knew about.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in our African culture, you are either normal or you are crazy. And we have realized that there's several things in between. Yeah. So really informing yourself about the everything in between.
Beautiful.
And being comfortable to seek support. And for parents and older people to just know that there's domestic abuse even in teen relationships. When we think about domestic abuse, we always think about people who are married or cohabiting. But our teenagers are dating people. And some of those people may be abusive. So some of these conversations need to be had really early.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. I love that you mentioned the parents, because that was the last piece that I was going to ask you to shed light on, without us blaming parents, because we're not here to blame parents or anybody for that matter. But we also know that being from the African diasporan communities, we are not adults. Even when we're adults, we're still highly reliant on our parents for guidance and support.
Yeah.
How can our parents sort of like what else can our parents do to help guide us and instill some of this like boundary setting, respecting boundaries, values in us?
With our cultures, we can't blame our parents for what they don't know or were not exposed to. And that's why in being in a country like this, there are lots of agencies, nonprofits that are doing work around teaching people all of these things. Mm-hmm. Community resources. And so exposing our kids to some of these things, enrolling them. And for those of us, like you and I doing this work, just creating programs and having opportunities to teach our young people and adults about some of these topics, building healthy relationships, and all of that includes assertive communication, setting boundaries, and understanding emotions, just being able to know some of these things and normalize them in our day-to-day, so that our kids are growing up proactively aware of these things rather than having to do them when there's an offense.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. That's very well put. Thank you so very much for your time. I know you're a busy woman, and making time to do this is something that we do not take for granted. Hopefully, if there's anybody that wants to connect with you, I know you're joining us all the way from Calgary, but hopefully you'd have room to take them on as a client. Is that a thing?
Yeah, that's a thing. Now we have virtual sessions that people find convenient, thanks to technology and to COVID. And so there's access to resources for anybody that needs them.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, you've had her. If you are a survivor or you think you're struggling with this personality and you want to connect, like she said, she works more with survivors. But if you want to reach out and connect with her, that's something that we can definitely support you with. It's been an amazing conversation. I personally have learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope that you have too. And I also hope that from now going forward, you're not going to throw that word around just like that, without adding some substance to it, or with this, or without some truth being added to it, or being without some truthful aspects to it. I am your girl Becca. This is the Ding Ding podcast. We've had another beautiful conversation. If you didn't watch the last episode that we had last week on single parenting and how to balance those dynamics, go on our websites, go on the channel, check it out, and watch it. Until our next episode, I am your girl Becca, and Sabe Sanding.